it wasn't even an interest in classical music. It was a passion for classical music straight from the get-go. There was a scandal in the family. He ran off from my granny, and in 1941 they were found on a bed together in a flat in Amsterdam. Him and his mistress. She having shot him and then shot herself. And I ended up actually walking up to pretty girls in the street saying, "I don't suppose you can play the oboe, can you?" Which of course was completely the wrong message. I always thought it'd be fun to do a blind tasting of, let's say, take 6 different versions of the planets and just play them to 6 critics, 10 critics, and ask them to fill in a little form as to which one they thought was conducted by the Womble. Of course, the world's full of artists like me who feel like that, and as they get older, they feel even more desperate that they've got to get their work down before they die. Hi there,
Mike,
so
how are
you made
you?
it. Fine, thank you very much.
Lovely to see you.
Yeah, you too.
I'm going to confess, I'm a little bit nervous because
Oh,
honestly, because you kind of, I've
that's good.
always sort of seen you as an old friend, and I've started making notes some time ago. My plan was, the best way I thought I was going to approach it, we're just going to chat like a couple of old friends,
Sounds
and
good.
and
Which
and
is what we
about
are.
lots of things, and at the end of it, I will make some sense of it for Opera Wire, and whatever's left over, if you think it's good fun, we may do something else with it.
Yeah, well, I get
However,
it. So the primary thing is written word, and uh,
absolutely.
yeah, that's great. Okay, well,
So I thought, how am I going to kind of start going on? It's unusual in that obviously I've interviewed many stars of opera who have done a kind of crossover somewhere along the line. Most of them have, or many have touched on it. But you're kind of like, and I made a note here. That was my first note that I made. You're kind of like a crossover artist in reverse. Obviously, your position in the contemporary music industry here in this country is cemented. You're a legend. Uh, but since the 70s, a lot of your work has had quite a lot of rich instrumental orchestration. You've conducted many orchestras, which we'll speak about a bit later. Uh, and I'm thinking, is Mike Batt a classical composer in disguise who just likes a bit of pop music?
if I had a one-word answer, it would be yes, but it could be equally much the other way around. It is absolutely a balance, an equal balance, which has come about just by the various influences I've had over the years, and also from the experience that I've sought to have. In other words, you don't go into the studio to make a record with a pop group or a rock and roll band if you don't want to, and you don't go into the studio to make a classical recording if you don't want to. And I've wanted to do both, and so I've done both. And so I've sort of run the two along parallel. And then when I've been in the studio, for example, okay, on a very, I nearly said light level, but yeah, it is light level because the Wombles, I decided it's still a good, fun way of, when I was younger, of having not had any formal training, of having experience as an arranger and conductor, choosing subject matter which was which gave me the opportunity to write orchestrations, whether it be big band or Hollywood style or brass band, military band, symphonic style. We even had the London Symphony Orchestra on a Womble record. So that was all great experience for me. So I was sort of had this insatiable yearning to work with orchestras, small ensembles, and with pop groups. And I think the people that sucked me into pop, like many people of my generation, were the Beatles. there's a Freudian slip for you. I nearly said Wombles. But when I was about 12, the Beatles started making records, and I'd already discovered Schubert's Ninth Symphony, and I was conducting a pile of furniture on Saturday mornings when my parents were out in the shop, out at the shops when we lived in Bradford, and I just piled up the furniture. I'd put notices, little signs saying violins 1, violins 2, violas, and then oboe sort of just over to the left in the middle. And then I would put the record on from Concert Hall Records, and I would conduct my imaginary orchestra all the way through. So I knew Schubert's Ninth Symphony before I knew She Loves You, but She Loves You came along very much quicker shortly after that, and I was equally enthralled with that.
Okay, that's a great revelation, conducting Schubert. How old was you then? You must have been very young, because
about 12 or 13.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I remember with my brother having a plastic guitar for one Christmas, and I was probably about 5 or 6, and we were singing "She Loves You," yeah, yeah, yeah. But certainly, I'd never heard anything even remotely like Schubert. How on earth your mum or your dad must have had something for classical music, I'm guessing.
No, they weren't really into music at all. Having said that, my dad was a very practical engineering type. He'd been in the army during the war. He came out at the age of 24 as an acting major. He had done his BSc in civil engineering. But he was also a qualified mechanical engineer. He was a really practical guy. And it surprised me when he bought a piano. I expected he'd be doing up the woodwork and selling it on, because he liked doing that sort of thing. And so he had a piano in the house for a period of time. In fact, it became forever, but we just thought it was for a moment. And he vamped out 3 pub songs on just the Black Keys with this great big rumpy-pumpy left hand with the tenths and octaves, this stuff. I don't know where the hell I asked him where he learned it. He said somebody taught it to him. So he must have had music in him. And my grandfather was, in fact, a brilliant organist, but I never met him, my maternal grandfather, because there was a scandal in the family. He ran off from my granny, and in 1941 they were found on a bed together in a flat in Amsterdam, him and his mistress, she having shot him and then shot herself. And so I never got to meet him. But that musical line goes back. I don't know why I've started answering this question. There wasn't even a question. It was to do with how much music in the family. The family music stopped at the death of my grandfather, in 1941 when he got shot by his mistress. But his father had bought a big organ, a massive big organ that had been in some castle. And he bought it because it didn't fit into his house, so he had a new house built round it, and the pipes went right up through the bedrooms. Apparently, it was quite an experience to stay there. They must have had a few people, but he was a colliery manager, so I don't quite understand how they could afford it. But they were obviously quite wacky people. I think my wackiness definitely comes from that side of the family, because my mum was very much. She made wonderful costumes. She was very artistic. She drew, she painted. She was an art mistress. So that was her side that's what I get from her. But of course, she was the daughter of this chap, Arthur, who was my grandfather, who had he was a bit of a Jack the Lad by the sounds of it.
I wasn't going to touch on that, but I think I contacted you about it, because that was something of a fairly recent revelation to you, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
That must have been a hell of a shock, and how your mum lived with that and never really said anything to anybody.
They never mentioned it. They never actually, even when I grilled her about it, she said, "Oh yes, something happened. We were all called in. My sister and I were called into our auntie's front room when we were, I think she was 12 or something, and told that our dad had been killed, and that was it. They weren't told that he'd run off with an actress. good actress. They seem to have a lot of portent there. And there's lots of lovely actresses. I'm in fact married to one.
Of course.
But, sorry, go on.
Of course. No, so we went off track a little bit there, but
We did. The answer is there was no real music in the family, and most people would say at least their dad and mum had, let me see, The Sound of Music, or the hits from the musicals on a gramophone in the house, but mine didn't. And the closest we got was buying George Formby records in old marketplaces and having a wind-up gramophone, which was great fun. I learned all the George Formby songs with my brothers, and we had a little ukulele, which has been the easiest string instrument on earth to play. And we used to just sing along to Dan the Dairy Man, which is one of the more obscure ones. And When I'm Cleaning Windows, obviously, is the most famous. But we knew all the lyrics, and we used to have a laugh with it.
So why Schubert? Where did Schubert come from?
Schubert came through the letterbox. One day. You know how, well, back in those days, before the web, the junk mail wasn't what you saw on your screen. Junk mail was a leaflet through the door selling crocuses and daffodil bulbs. And instead of that, one day, I had a letter come through the door, rather a leaflet, I should say. A leaflet came through the door for Concert Hall Records. And the tantalizing offer was 4 free classical EPs for nothing. And I didn't read much further, but underneath it did say that you had to buy 1 album a year for 26 shillings, which is £1, about £1 and £1.50.
Yeah,
nearly, not even that. And yet that's a lot for me. I got a shilling a week pocket money, so that was a 20th of a pound. Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, 20 shillings a pound, 21 for the beginning.
Somehow I had to find the money to buy an album a year. Maybe the 4. I remember clearly what the EPs were that I got, and I was absolutely thrilled to get them. There were excerpts from the Mikado, Swan Lake Overture, and instrumental stuff from Swan Lake. What else? Brahms Hungarian Dances, including I don't think it was all of them on one EP. It would have been, I think it was number 3 and number 5. Anyway, so that's how I started. I can't remember what the 4th one was, but anyway, that awoke my. It wasn't even an interest in classical music. It was a passion for classical music straight from the get-go. It was, I absolutely played those records to death. I knew A Wandering Minstrel I, before I knew any pop music at all. And then, as I say, as soon as pop music came along, I was into that as well. So
you're a true.
And then the Schubert thing, was the first when I had to pick my first LP to pay real money for. I had to choose, between whatever was on from Concert Hall Records that month, and it was I picked out Schubert's Ninth Symphony. I had no idea what I was picking out. It was almost like putting a pin in a map. So Schubert's Ninth Symphony, conducted by Karl Schuricht, in mono, with, I think it was the Stuttgart Radio Orchestra. And I've looked it up on the web, and there are, I've still got that record actually somewhere. It's in a box in an attic somewhere. But it is still available on what do you call it, eBay.
Wow. Wow. I tell you what, I spent a considerable amount of time last night playing I Will Be There, which obviously you did with Katie. And I concluded that is probably to date your opus. That first minute is absolutely sublime. I'm talking about the concert version.
The introduction. Yeah.
And I just listened to it, and I played it to my wife earlier on today. I said, just listen to this. I'm not going to show you who each. Just listen to this first minute. Tell me what. And between us, we sort of heard Mascagni, definitely Puccini, and it was just. I absolutely think it's an incredible. And I remember, as much as I love the song, and I know that it's a deeply personal piece of music to you for obvious reasons, refers to your own mum. But I ended up always wishing you'd ran with that first minute and built something around it. I just think that would have been the most incredible piece of music ever.
Well, it's very nice of you to say so, and I'm flattered. And in fact, I had not worries, because it was an album track we were writing. I wasn't expecting it to be a single, but I knew that it was a piece that was going to get played. I was going to get to conduct it in the Buckingham Palace Gardens for the Queen, and also my mum was in bed upstairs in our house in Farnham, in a bad way with cancer, and so I was hoping she would get to the concert in time. She was exactly the same age as the Queen, 86 at the time. And sadly, she died about 2 weeks before the concert, but she did get to hear the recording. And I put that piece of instrumental in, knowing that it was going to be a concert piece and that it would not sound too bad on the record for people on the album. But of course, if you ever put it out as a single, we'd have to chop that off.
Yeah.
And we did put it out as a single, and we, a radio station that we aim at usually was Radio 2. They asked us for a bit more bass drum and a bit more hi-hat and the usual questions. And, you'd think to yourself, well, surely do they really care that much that you could probably think you could have sent it back the same and they'd have said, oh yeah, that's much better. But anyway, it's funny you should say that, because I'm about to, at least there's so many things I always tell people I'm about to do, and the best way actually to get round to doing something is to tell as many people as possible, brag about it, and then you've got to do it, because otherwise, you'd be found out. And that's what I did with the Hunting of the Snark. I went around telling all my mates I'd found this thing, of Lewis Carroll's, and I was going to do it. So about 3 months later, I know we jumped subject. I'm just saying as motivation.
Yeah.
Where I'm using it as a reference is that I am intent on writing a symphonic piece of some length. I shudder to call it a symphony because it's, it sounds slightly pretentious, but I think that's what it will be. But how modern I will make it in terms of instrumentation, whether I put electric guitars in it or not, I don't know, because it would mean, from a commercial point of view, it would never be able to be played on classic FM, for example. They will only play things with acoustic guitars on it, right? So you'd have to have a Spanish guitar playing the lead. I think all of those little things go into the mincer of my commercial mind as well as my artistic mind.
Yeah.
Which is the same mind, but I'm just saying it has to think in.
Yeah, of course.
So I am planning might be too firm a word. I'm hoping to write a symphonic, extended symphonic piece anyway, in the next year or so. It'd be lovely to find someone who can finance it, like a record company. So I know I'll be doing it, because that's always the best thing for me, is to put the deadline in, even book the sessions. I actually book the sessions usually. Yes. And then with a blank piece of paper, and then I know I've got to write it by the time of the session.
Yes.
And of course, my wife always accuses me of leaving it till the last week to write it. And I just say to her, well, something's got to be written. Even if I start 3 months earlier, it would be a waste of the last week if I didn't do something in it. And so that's how it works. But funnily enough, let's say I took that intro you're talking about and extended it into a full-length piece. You and I might think, great. And that's really should be the benchmark, because it's satisfying me is what any artist should aim at, regardless of the remarks just now about tailoring stuff for radio stations. But it would be absolutely not thought of by contemporary classic critics as being of cultural interest, because they're all into their avant-garde, atonal or experimental stuff. I mean, if you've ever heard my album 6 Days in Berlin, you may not have, but it's very it's the most sort of experimental, slightly avant-garde type of album I've done, and there's one track in it which I just wrote it from start to finish. I didn't plan it, and when I got halfway through, I then wrote it backwards from there to the end. So it gets to the middle, and then I literally, almost as an act of copying, copied it backwards, bar by bar, until it ended up with the first bar backwards at the end. So technically, you should be able to flip the thing over and play it the other way around, with all backwards sounds playing the same tunes up to the middle, and then real sounds playing it backwards to the end. So, I mean, I have gone there, and I do like going there, but I certainly wouldn't like to have to write a piece. And here's where you get to the how do we please the critics section of your brain. If I really wanted to be taken seriously as a modern composer, I would be writing pieces of music that I didn't really want to hear.
Yeah,
I'd be writing music that was as way out and as that would alienate the audience as much as possible, so the critics could feel all warm and cozy that they did understand it.
Yes.
I don't want to write that kind of music.
I think something also struck me about that minute of orchestration from that piece. It was very cinematic as well. What a great movie score that would have made as well. And perhaps that's another a line for you to exploit. I mean, you never stop. I mean, I love your doodles. I love your artwork. It's incredible. I think it gives a great insight into how, I get the impression that you're always having to have an outlet for these brainwaves that are going around in your head, and whether that be a music or you have to quickly grab a pen and draw something or paint something.
Yeah, I think it's the same with a lot of us. I'm sure you're the same, and we all, we're all different. But one thing I think that a lot of people do share is the wish to communicate.
Yes,
and I'm always thinking of ideas and wanting to communicate. That's why I do so much on Twitter, and I try to keep Instagram and even a little bit of TikTok going. Not just for mucking about purposes, but for communicating ideas and having a bit of fun. And sometimes it's on a very light level, and sometimes it's a little bit, other people might see it as a little bit more, quote, thoughtful, unquote, and even to have a little bit of depth. A little bit of depth is actually an oxymoron, isn't it? Almost.
I understand it.
Yeah.
It works for me. I like it.
But let me say that, yeah, I do. I always want to be doing something. I mean, I've only got to reach out this far to show you that I'm surrounded by coloured pens all day long. I've got about 200 of these. Bloody things keep drying up. They're $3.99 each as well. Anyway, they're very good colours when they behave themselves.
I think your artwork is fantastic.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. I certainly enjoy doing it, but sometimes I feel a bit guilty if I find myself at sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon doing that when I should probably be finishing a job, which might be working with an artist and delivering it on the following Monday, and there I am. It's not. I usually only. What I do is I doodle when I'm on the phone, and then I sometimes just photograph those and put them on Twitter.
Yeah.
And then if I think one's worth working on, as I did recently with the most recent one, I'll just keep it. I think, you know what, that's actually, not only is that at the top left-hand corner of a blank piece of paper, I could extend that downwards.
Yes.
And then you get a bit more serious about it. You start designing it as you go. And so it then becomes not a doodle. It becomes a sort of thought through, well, it's not thought through, thought as you, thinking as I go. I'll then develop it into a piece of, hopefully, art. And the good news is, if it's a piece of shit, you could just throw it away afterwards.
Yes.
But if it's okay, you keep it. And some of them are okay, and some of them don't make the cut. But that's what, you know, that's the whole thing about any art, really.
Any creative process, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, what attracted you? Why Holst of the Planets, which was pretty much widely well received, actually? What one or two people rather snobbishly, but the industry is the classical music industry, and the opera industry still does have its elements of those people who are always trying to conduct the Holst of the Planets.
Exactly. That's been my problem, because I've always been I'm the outsider for every genre. Because but let's just deal with the planets for a start. I mean, the BBC magazine didn't even review it. But those who did review it, well, I'm very delighted about. And some did. And the ones who were slightly snobby about it, and snotty, that's a better word, about it, the word womble appeared in the first paragraph of their review. And that told me where their mind was at when they were listening to it, which you can, I'm sure, understand.
Yes.
And even though I'm very proud of the Wombles, and they did me a lot of good, and you know, let's be honest, when I was a young man, they made me quite wealthy. So I am grateful, and not that I've been that wealthy all my life, but it goes up and down, because I'm very much a risk taker, both artistically and commercially. By doing that, you forfeit the right to sort of just keep growing your wealth. You know, you have to risk it on a yearly basis, and I've had many times when as I just said to you now, I'd write a symphony if I had somebody who could pay for it to be recorded. Well, it's only 100,000 quid or something, or less, 50, 30,000, 20,000 to, two sessions with a 60-piece orchestra. I'm not saying I couldn't strain to find that if I really had to, but I've got about another 8 projects I want to do as well. So, the one thing I have forfeited by sometimes doing projects where the art led it rather than the money, is that I've lost out. I've done projects which have been loss making, which if you ask me would I do them again, the answer would be yes, because artistically, The Hunting of the Snark, for example, as a piece, if you put a gun to my head and say, right, here's a button, here's a red button you can press, and everything you ever wrote or recorded is going to disappear from mankind forever, but you're allowed to keep one piece. It wouldn't be Bright Eyes, it wouldn't be the Wombles, it wouldn't be Katie Melua stuff, it would be The Hunting of the Snark, because that to me is the central piece of my life. And I want to record the full 2-hour version of it, because we only had recorded a 40-minute version of it, which was an initial concept album starring God knows everyone from John Hurt, John Gielgud, Roger Daltrey, Art Garfunkel, Cliff Richard, Denise Williams, Captain Sensible, a few others, and the London Symphony Orchestra. And to me, that Stefan Grappelli, George Harrison played a guitar solo on it. It was bliss for me. The names aren't to me more important, but they certainly helped. But I think I sort of found my niche in terms of where of being able to write a theatrical piece which pleased me but was also commercial on that particular album. And when we took it to the West End, it didn't last very long for lots of reasons, including the fact it was undercapitalized, and it was in the Gulf War, and there was no American. It's the first year of the Gulf War, 1991. No American tourists in town. I mean, just everything that you wouldn't do if you were a sensible producer. You go up undercapitalized at a time like that. But anyway, I'd like to say it was that rather than the quality of the performances and the quality of the work. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, I know I tend to ramble off the questions, but
that's okay.
That piece to me, we were talking about affordability. I would go into a studio tomorrow. I've got all the arrangements, and I just need someone to finance that. And even 10 years ago, it would have been a record company, a major record company. But now with streaming, people aren't spending the money. So even a classical label who wanted to sort of be a bit cooler and have something, or be a bit, well, not necessarily cooler, but make a few bob, might think, great, we'll do Mike's Snart.
Yes.
And those people are few and far between now. What I really probably need is a billionaire who's a fan, who just says, okay, look, here's a budget of a couple of million quid, just go off and do six projects you want to do, and that would keep me busy for the next 5 or 6 years, doing it all.
Let's hope he's out there. Let's hope
they read this magazine.
Yeah, exactly. So just briefly, why Holst the Planets? What a kind of...
Don't know. I just love it. It's so beautifully orchestrated, which brings me to a point, by the way, and of course, you'll edit this piece as you wish, and I don't know what your number count is, but I'm sure I'm going to exceed it with what I say. But
no problem.
Your word count is, Rimsky-Korsakov was complimented on his orchestration. He wrote one of the best books on orchestration. I've got it up there. It's one of those there.
I haven't read that.
And he said, so many good people wrote them. Glenn Miller wrote one, which is great for big band arranging, and Henry Mancini wrote one. But that was my very first one that I used, and that is up there as well. The very same copy that I had when I was 18. Still got it. But the Rimsky-Korsakov point was, somebody said to him, I really like your orchestration. And he said, I don't orchestrate, I compose for orchestra. And there is a difference. Coming back to your film music point, I've got friends who are well-known film composers, and I'm talking about the very best known. I'm not going to name names, because what I'm going to say is slightly disparate, could be read as slightly disparaging. It's not disparaging. It's just that the world has changed. And you get guys, they'll come in and they'll work out what the themes should be, and maybe say to an orchestrator, this is how I kind of see it, with big strings here and some timps, whatever, maybe at that point where the guy comes through, crashing through the door and falls downstairs. And then the orchestrator then finishes it off. And they say that's because of the time involved. And I've always just worked with me and a copyist, and we work all the way through the night, and I turn up at the studio the next day and conduct it, and that goes straight down onto tape as it used to be, or sort of more in the old style of the Ennio Morricone days. But even so, farming out the orchestration would be an anathema to me. And because it's part of the composition. And the reason I'll say that, because I'm going to get back to your planets in a minute.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm quite sure that while he was writing it, if he used anything like, here I am again putting airs and graces on, but if it was anything like the way I think, you'd be sitting there thinking, right, what would come next? Okay, maybe a little bit of the violas would sweep in a bit here. What tune shall I write for them? Okay, how about that? Yeah, and then shall I double it with the cellos? Yeah, I think so, because we're not using them. But I'll mute the cellos so that they blend in softer, and you'd hardly notice them, but you'll just know that it sounds warmer. Now, you're making all those decisions while you're writing the melody. And not only that, if you write such a good melody after that, you might think, wow, that could be used for an oboe tune with a bit of staccato over it. When we introduce the next section, but at double the tempo. And so you're composing as you're orchestrating, which is not what happens in modern film music or TV music these days. And to me, again, not comparing myself in quality to Rimsky-Korsakov or Holst, but certainly in the way I work, it's often comes that I think I need a soft instrumentation moment with a clarinet lead coming up, and then you put it in, and then you realize what you need underneath it, some pizzicato basses, whatever, and then bang, in comes an up-tempo section which you've kind of got already because you remember the theme from when you wrote it the first time, which in classical terms, in symphonic terms, would be called the first subject in sonata form, which is the form that was used throughout the ages in the romantic days. You know, first subject, second subject, development, recapitulation. That form was stuck to for years and years and years. That's just only the same now as writing a piece of music and thinking, oh, I've got that theme. I'll now repeat it. But in between it, I need to do something else to take your mind off it before I come back and reveal it again. And those are compositional thoughts that any intelligent composer is going to have, and a few unintelligent ones. I'm just kidding. And so, meanwhile, back at Holst, that's what I like about. Well, it's the same. Take another piece of music I like. Let's say Wagner's Siegfried Idyll. That to me is a piece written like that, almost written as he went along. I'm sure he didn't. I'd be very doubtful if Wagner did a pencil sketch for Siegfried Idyll. But anyway, moving back to Holst, I keep going off it. It's so gloriously orchestrated. It's definitely orchestrated as it's been composed. And that's what I love about it. It's organically, the compositional thought is organically ingrained into the melodic and harmonic thought. And that is what makes it a great piece to me, and such an exciting one to conduct. Sometimes when I listen to other conductors and I'm being critical and snarky in my mind, because we're all jealous, at least I am sometimes, of each other. And obviously there are people I look up to and think, fucking hell, they're brilliant. But let's just take, there was a couple, I won't name names, but a well-known composer who came from the film writing, well-known conductor. I remember hearing something that he'd conducted, and I thought, yeah, it's fine. It's slightly lightly conducted, I think. And it's almost when you're conducting, I have this feeling that some conductors will reach out over the orchestra and conduct from the down, almost down from the top. I think of, not always, but I think that very often conductors got to get underneath the orchestra like a forklift truck and lift them up from the bass end. And so that you've got to think from the floor up. and that's what makes a strong. That's effectively what you're doing, is making sure the rhythm section are tight, because that's where the basses and cellos and the bass trombones and the timpani are all doing. Even the strings, if they're playing rhythm, like spiccato kind of rhythms or whatever it might be. Conducting an orchestration with me have my passion for both of them they've informed each other, because only by conducting a piece, like a piece I've done it in concert a few times. Sinbad, Rimsky-Korsakov, the Sinbad section of I've done all of the in concert, not recorded it, but or Scheherazade. That swirling sea and fabulous, again, compositional orchestration, I'll call it, rather than just orchestration of a composition. It just the way things, the whole thing, you do feel as if you've got your arms underneath it and you're holding it up as it swirls forward and round and over and under. Whereas sometimes I've sometimes I've critiqued other conductors and thought, yeah, that's fine. It actually comes over fine, but I can hear they haven't absolutely grabbed it by the balls or if you want to write a different word, grabbed it by the short and curve, grabbed it by the something, scruff of the neck, and given it a good I'm going to go somewhere I don't want to go here. They hadn't made physical contact with it. That's what it is. That's what I love about conducting, is that you reach into the orchestra and you make physical contact with them from obviously a certain distance, i.e. a few feet. That's the glory of being part of that orchestra, which is the same glory you feel when you're writing an orchestration that you know is going to end up hopefully as a well balanced piece with power, whatever it's going to need, power, passion, delicacy, beauty, whatever the music is going to express. Maybe horror, who knows? Although I've never written for a horror film. But it's music, and there's nothing that turns me on more than working with 70 great musicians in a fabulous studio. And going back to your point about films, yeah, I felt when I was in my mid-20s, I was put on earth to write film scores, and I did write a few. The favourite of mine being Caravans, which was in 1978. And I was delighted to be put on the shortlist with John Barry, Michel Jarre, Michel Legrand, and me. And I was the only unknown one. I was known for writing Womble songs, but that's all. And I persuaded them to pick me to do a trial session, and they liked the trial session, and so they hired me to do it. But I then got involved in so many other things, and I think the lesson I learned, and it's too late to learn from it to my benefit now, although I'm sure I've got another good 10 years or so in me, at least. I'd like to think I've got 20,
I would hope so.
Let's hope. And I don't feel any less energetic than I did when I was 18, and I've probably got more to prove now, because I've still got the wombles to I've got to not prove to anyone else, I suppose, except myself. But no, actually, it is only to other people, because I've come to terms with it. But the wombles definitely, just as you mentioned, as far as the planets is concerned, it definitely earned me some snobbishness against me in some of the reviews. Some of them were more positive, more accepting of the fact that music is a universal language, that it shouldn't be dissected according to one's preconceptions of what someone's done before. But I'm afraid that is what happens, and I made my own bed and I have to lie in it. But I just wish I had 3 or 4 lifetimes, so I could be me as I am now in this lifetime, and then start another one as a film composer and another one as but you can't, and you do what you. In a way, I've probably squashed more into the blender of my life than most musicians, because I get I've got friends who might be famous rock stars, rock and roll guys, who would say to me, who have said to me, "Oh, Mike, you're so lucky to do so many things," and I say, "Yeah, but only because I'm doing because I want to. You could do it." And they say, "Yeah, but I can't because my public wouldn't let me, because they've become famous as let's say, playing heavy metal or even indie rock. I don't see myself as an indie classic, what do you call it? Prog rock. But I suppose I'm the nearest thing to prog rock that a journalist would describe. But I don't see myself as that. Maybe I'm being snobbish by setting myself apart from that genre. I just write what I want, and it comes out slightly prog rocky. But
yeah, I think I've said to you on more than one occasion, I think you're probably, whether by design, I don't think it's snobbish at all. I've always thought of you, and I've frequently said that you have to be one of the most underestimated composers we have. And I feel old because I can remember vividly a young, fresh-faced boy with a guitar singing "Summertime City," surrounded by hot chicks on top of the pop. Something which I always rib you about. And I loved that track. All jokes aside, but yeah, I really have always thought of you really and truly as a serious. And having spoken to you today and learned about, conducting Schubert as a 12-year-old, and your obvious incredible knowledge of not just conducting. I think most people think you just stand there with a stick and try and keep everybody together. And your knowledge of orchestration and how that's actually a separate entity from composing a piece. Writing it is one thing. Getting it out to people's ears is a separate thing altogether. I think it just proves that for me, I think I wasn't wrong about you. I think you are a serious composer of classical music who just never quite fulfilled his full potential.
Well, because I would have had to have devoted myself entirely to that.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to be a conductor, only a conductor, and I came that close once to being offered the principal conductorship of the London Symphony, which was because they were waiting for their grant. They didn't think they were going to get their Arts Council grant renewed. This was in the early 80s or late 70s, I can't remember which, early 80s. And Clive Wilkinson and Anthony Camden, they were the 2 people running it. They came to my house and they said, if we offered you the job as principal conductor, would you take it? Because we might not get our grant. And if we don't get our grant, we're going to go commercial. And we want someone who could lead us and guide us in, who can still do the classical repertoire, but could bring in commercial jobs, films, whatever, as well, because that we want to eat as well as art. We want eat and art, and to my chagrin, they got their Arts Council grant, and I think that was when they hired Claudio Abbado to be their principal conductor, and bloody good choice it was as well.
It was. But what a great story to illustrate to perfection my point that I've always kind of made about you as a serious musician. Because I mean, of course, another amazing conductor, Sir Antonio Pappano, is actually in 2024 just going to conduct the London Symphony Orchestra after 10 years at the Royal Opera House. What a close call that to put on your resume.
Yeah, and just think what I wouldn't have done if I had done that. I'd have done different things, which I'm sure would have enjoyed, but I would never have written 9 Million Bicycles. And you might say, well, so what? But
that's a beautiful piece of music.
You know what I mean? Life sort of blows you in all the different directions. And all I'm saying is that, I think if this is the big-headed bit. You can call it, paragraph titled "The Big-Headed Bit." Is that I'm sorry, I'm not really meaning that. I'm not writing.
I'm not going to write that.
That if I had wanted to become a conductor, I think I could have been up there with Simon Rattle. If I'd done it full time, that's the point. I'm an outsider though, because people would never think, who should we get to conduct the orchestra tonight? Oh, I wonder if Mike Batt's free. There's thousands of other people that they would think of first. A heavy metal band thinking about who to get to produce them, or write with them, or get to join. They've lost they need a new, They're not going to think of me, are they? But I have produced heavy metal bands and written for them successfully. All I'm saying is every genre always would see me. I would never be I'm not one of the iconic first 6 people you think of when you think of the great achievers in that genre. So I'm always going to be the outsider, which actually suits me down to the ground when I want to jump from genre to genre and do different things. You can assemble, if you have a foot in each camp, you can assemble people together, just as I did with the Hunting of the Snark. I mean, all of those people are from different genres. Have you ever seen the I know you seem to know quite a lot about my stuff, but I mean, there's always, no one knows everything about everyone, but I don't know if have you heard the Snark at all?
I have heard, yes, of course. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. If you've ever seen the, it's on YouTube if you care to listen to it, the film we did of the concert we did a charity concert at the Royal Albert Hall, and Cliff couldn't make it as the bellman, who's the kind of captain of the ship. So we got Billy Connolly, of all people, to replace him. And Billy was so good. He was just brilliant.
He's a great actor.
Yeah. And we did it in a costumed oratorio configuration. In other words, you've got an orchestra, and they were costumed as well in sort of sailors, stripy T-shirts and red bandanas. And that was the LSO, and in front of them a bunch of microphones and music stands, because no one was being expected to learn it. And everyone sat together. Julian Lennon as the baker, Justin Hayward stood in for Art Garfunkel, and we had a lovely time doing it. John Hurt did it, narrated it at the time, because the part was for a narrator. When we did it in the West End, the narrator became the actual character of Lewis Carroll. It was played by David McCullum, that used to be the Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Man from U.N.C.L.E., yeah.
Sidekick, Ilya Kuryakin from the Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Yeah.
So anyway, all I'm saying is that that's one of the glories of having a little bit of pull in every camp.
Genre. Yeah.
But what it means is you're never going to be the pinnacle of that genre, and then that sort of it is in answer to your thought about being the classical composer that got away. I would have had to have said to everyone, look, guys, I just do classical composing. That's all I do. And I can't do that, I'm afraid. I want to be able to put a guitar riff in, or a kick drum if I need it. And, you know, I love that. What saddens me is that, again, I was about to say this under the big-headed titling, is that I almost think of myself, even though my wife would, if she was listening to me, who knows, maybe she is standing outside the door listening. But anyway, either way, I love doing all these different things, and I sometimes say, oh God, I wish I was better known. I wish I was a bigger star. You know, I wish all of the things that, you know, I wish I was known in America more. And people say, don't be so bloody ungrateful. Look how many people do think you know, a lot about, do appreciate what you do. And some people haven't ever had a hit, never mind a number one with Art Garfunkel that was number one in 6 countries and sold, you know, multi-millions of records. So I've had a fantastic life. I just whinge about the things that it would have been nice to have done, or the fact that it would have been nicer to have had status as, you know, and as one of the top people in all the various genres I work in, and that you can't ride 6 horses and win the race.
No,
you know, against people who are only riding 1 horse. That's probably the best analogy I've ever come up with for it. I think where am I going with this? So when people say that, don't be so ungrateful, you're very successful and you're well known and loved, and I am very grateful for all of that. I really am. But I still do think of myself a little bit, and this might sound completely off kilter, but I think of myself a little bit of a Van Gogh of music, in that there's more people in the world who don't know what I do, and it might take for me to be dead before they find out, as long as the world survives long enough for some student in 3 generations' time to dig my stuff up out of the Bodleian Library, if it's still there, and say, hey, there's this guy who used to do, you know, it's happened before, and so that's why when I put stuff down and when I record stuff that isn't necessarily successful commercially at that moment, I think to myself, I'm sort of laying it down like wine for the future. And if somebody finds it in the future, then that'll be good. So I don't ever think of it as wasted. If I do a project I'm happy with, and The Hunting of the Snark comes into that category at the moment. I mean, a lot of people thought it was brilliant and love it, and I still get lots of love for it. But the world doesn't know. The big wide world doesn't know. And the key to the big wide world is America. If The Hunting of the Snark had been a big hit in America, that would have been my life. You know, it would be a downhill slide in terms of easiness. It would have been a much easier ride from there on in. But I think, yes. I know I'm talking a lot without you even asking a question.
That's good. That's what I intended, Mike.
I think that's one of the reasons I'm still so ambitious at my age, 74, as the same as I was when I was 18, is because I think I've still got a lot to prove, and not just prove but do. I want to get it done, you know, while I've still got breath to do it, and so I guess. Of course, the world's full of artists like me who feel like that, and as they get older, they feel even more desperate that they've got to get their work down before they die. Well, I guess I'm a bit like that. Um, and it's nice that I'm appreciated, but I just wish, it was, I don't know, you see some people who've had what you might call a fabulous opening quarter of their life, say someone like Paul McCartney, and they haven't always kept the standard up all the way through, even though they're brilliant. I mean, I absolutely look up to Paul McCartney. He's 7 years older than me, and I was a Beatle nut. I was absolutely head over heels with the Beatles when I was 12, and you do find that people who have had massive success in their up to the years of, I don't know, just before. Having said that, I had pretty massive success with the Wombles when I was 23. But I don't know. You, maybe I've run out of steam with this idea, but I'm just saying, not everyone at my age is still going, oh my God, I better hurry up because I've got all these projects to do. And it's unfortunate that I don't have the wealth that I have had many times in my life at the moment. I'm not saying I'm doing badly, but I'm not, I just can't go into the studio every time I want and
No.
spend 200,000 quid on a new project because I need someone else to do that. So maybe I'm finally learning that lesson, use other people's money because, my habit has been to say, oh, fuck it, I'll just do it myself.
Yeah. I think, unfortunately, the world we live in doesn't really facilitate that, particularly in the arts, particularly in music. Like you said, in the old days, the old adage about your talent, where you could demonstrate your talent and it had a value. Today, I mean, people don't even bother with record companies anymore. They set up a YouTube channel and
Yeah.
do their own stuff. And is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. I think history will probably not judge it to be good. I
No,
think
it's a stampede, isn't it?
well, it is, and it's not. It's the same as all arts. In the old days, you wanted to be a movie star or a TV star. You'd go through the rigmarole, maybe go to RADA or just learn to act, or you'd go on the stage or something, and hopefully. And then along came the dreadful reality television era where you didn't really need much talent at all. You just had to, I don't know, get your tits out or make a sex thing or do something ridiculously outrageous. And we will make. And now people don't even aspire to do that. They just make their own stuff on YouTube. They get a camera. They do the most ridiculous, unbelievable stuff. And okay, Jesus. I mean, some of these guys are making millions doing that. It's true. Sure. But ultimately, will history judge that as being a great pool of talent? The next generation of, I don't think so.
No, I agree with you. It certainly makes it very much more difficult for. It just means I call it background radiation or white noise, depending on which day it is. It gets in the way of the people who know what they're doing and know where they're going and can do it well. But then the opposite argument is, well, yeah, but if it didn't exist, you'd have to go and impress some arsehole in the A&R department at Universal. If you're good enough, why can't you just put your music up on the web? So there is a middle ground there.
Of course, there always is. Let's talk opera a little bit. Okay. I learn something new about you every day. I think this is what makes you interesting. And when you told me that you actually liked Irish tenor John McCormack, I was absolutely shocked. I presume you know the famous story with him and Enrico Caruso.
No, I don't. I probably don't. Oh,
Well,
maybe I do.
he,
Yes.
well,
Is this got to do with EMI Records?
no, they were, I think it was in New York. Caruso was over recording something, and John McCormack, they were staying in the same hotel, and John McCormack bumped into Enrico Caruso in the foyer of the hotel and said, Enrico, how's the world's greatest tenor doing? And Caruso said to him, since when did you switch to baritone? And that's a great, I think that's a great, certainly indication of how Caruso felt about John McCormack.
Yeah. I think one of the, sorry, you keep going.
Yeah, I was just saying, so they're one of the, probably unquestionably one of the greatest voices, and what was it about him that struck you, what appealed to you?
Well, I got to say, I didn't lead the charge into that project. I learned about him more as I went along. But so he wasn't something I listened to when I was 12.
No.
But the story I thought you were going to say is that he had a bad relationship with someone in the London office at EMI, and that's why he never really broke through in the UK as much as he did elsewhere in the world. There literally was, okay, I don't know what had happened, whether he'd offended someone, but there was, that's why I talked about some arsehole at Universal. And by the way, anyone from Universal listening, I love you all. And,
I have an interesting score for your next projects.
But there are arseholes at Sony and EMI as well. Of course. And Warner's. And Cherry Red, hey, everywhere. So yeah, I had made an album sometime before. This is a bit of backstory, so you won't need it really, but with Colm Wilkinson, the first Jean Valjean in Les Miserables. He is, I don't know whether you know his work, but he is the most stunning tenor / rock tenor that you could possibly. He's never studied classical music, but that's what he is. I made an album with him, which I don't really want to check it out. You can check it out on Spotify. It's called Stage Heroes, where we did 2 or 3 songs from each of several musicals. There are about 16 tracks on the album, and I sort of wrote little orchestral segues between the. So we did Maria and something else from West Side Story, but with a link, and so on. And that's one of the favorite albums I've ever made. I played it to John Hurt one day. We'd been for a drink at our local pub. Luckily, I had a house which was just 2 doors away from a pub. So John and I went and got a pint of Guinness and brought it home from the pub, which is what I used to do, just walk along the pavement. And I've been telling him about this record I made with Colm Wilkinson. And John I said, I'll just play you one track of what I've been doing lately. And he said, after the first track, he said, oh, don't take it off. Don't take it off. And he listened to the whole album and he was in tears throughout, because Colm is such a great singer / actor that it's unbelievable. So if you, I don't know how familiar you are with him, even his name, but
what was the name again, Mike?
Colm Wilkinson.
I have to be honest and say I'm not familiar with him.
Yeah, well, you should have a just because I'm begging you to, just for your own pleasure.
Yeah.
But listen to Stage Heroes, which is the album we made.
Yeah.
And you'll hear how impassioned the way he sings Maria from West Side Story And that line, Maria, he sails down that note, and it's as strong as any operatic tenor, but it's got that rocky quality to it, and the passion in his voice is just brilliant. But anyway, so I worked with him. His manager, about 4 or 5 years later, rang me, Irish guy, and rang me, and because both of them are Irish. Colm is, of course, with a name like that. And he said, I've got this new artist. He's a Catholic priest, just become famous, sort of got his own show on RTE, and his name is Finbar Wright. And he said, I'd like to see if you'd like to work with him. So we met and we decided to make an album, and we did a couple of my songs. We did just some general stuff. We did what's that? Valencia, da 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 da. A lot of that Italian stuff, old sort of semi-operatic Italian stuff that I just arranged and conducted it and produced it, and it went out. It became number one album in Ireland. And then they said, let's do a follow-up, and I said, great. And St. Patrick's Day was coming up, and it was Finbar who said to me, I'd like to do a tribute to John McCormack. And I thought, wow, that's a great idea, and particularly for Paddy's Day with the Irish Symphony Orchestra. So we thought of all of the John McCormack songs we knew and liked, and they knew more about it than I did, frankly. But anything that was in his repertoire was fair game to put on this album. And so I did a set of orchestrations for this thing, and we did it as a concert, a live concert with the Irish National Symphony Orchestra. It was recorded for RTE television, and we recorded the album. And that's it. Again, it's maybe you might like to check it out on Spotify. I think it's up there as an album. Sometimes with these albums that you do, they do compilations and they miss the albumness of a project by doing that. But I think I've got a feeling it's called a tribute. It's literally called a tribute to John McCormack.
Yeah, I listened to some bits of it last night.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's how it came about. It was Finbar's idea, and it went to number 3 in the Irish charts. And it was one of the high points and enjoyable moments of the work I've done. Let me say, Oxford University Press asked me if they could handle it as for hire, and a lot of orchestras and artists rented. I lodged a set of parts and orchestra scores with them, and they had it as part of their highlight library for about 10 years, I think it was, and it was
fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic. A lot of people did them.
Chronologically, I'm going to look unprofessional now. Was that before or after sort of the Planets, the group, and Bond and Vanessa Mae, or was that
It was just after the one of the low points of my commercial life, but high points of my artistic life, was the Hunting of the Snark in 1991, which I told you was on the first year of the invasion of Iraq, and therefore not the best time to put a show on. It came crashing down. We nearly lost our home. It wasn't a great time. And in fact, the Finbar Wright album was the first thing I did after that. I mean, literally the phone didn't ring for a year afterwards. No one wanted me to do anything. The phone was always buzzy with people ringing me, asking me to do stuff, offering me artists. And I just said, look, I haven't got time to do it. That was normal life. But that just stopped after Snark, and literally no one rang at all. Till one day, Maurice Cassidy, the manager of Colm Wilkinson, who I'd worked with in the 80s, he rang and said, I've got this artist called Finbar Wright. So that was about 1992, 93, 92, 92. So that's when that was. I did a couple of albums with David Essex, then along came Vanessa Mae in about 95. No, 94 maybe, something like that. A lot happened between 92 and 94. And in 94, thankfully, the album I made with Vanessa Mae, when we sold 4 million records.
And that really launched her.
Yeah, it launched her, and it put me back into a good financial situation, which then led on to eventually the Bond was something I put together with Mel Bush, who had been a friend and had been the manager, was the manager of David Essex. That's how I knew him. And I said to him one day after we had done, he brought Vanessa Mae to me, and I made the album that broke her, and we took it to EMI, and they were obviously delighted because they suddenly had a commercial act that could sell millions rather than just, making really good classical records that were basically for slow catalogue progress. Anyway, so he and I kind of fell out because he and I used to have dinner a couple of times, 3 times a year maybe. We lived very close to each other in Bayswater, and one day I said to him, "Hey, why don't we why don't we form a string quartet together of Vanessa Mae's? 2 violinists, a viola, cello. We could even make them have transducers on or electronic instruments, so that the cellist could become a drummer by having the low string be a bass drum and the high string be a hi-hat, and and so on, and then become a regular string quartet again anytime they wanted to." He said, "That's a good idea," but we left it, and then the next day he rang me and said, "Let's do it." Anyway, to cut a long story short, while I was doing another project on Universal, which was the Watership Down TV score, from which I did a orchestral suite that I'm very proud of, that went out on my record label as a self-contained orchestral suite. While I was doing that, he went off and sold Bond to Universal behind my back. And so I was very irritated by this. And so...
understandably so.
Yeah. And so
I wasn't aware of that.
I thought I'll form my own Bond, but I wanted a band that could play live without a backing track. And so I auditioned, and I had 4 girls and 4 boys. If you know what the planets are,
yes,
you might have heard some of their stuff.
Yeah,
and I did the arrangements in a way, such a way that they could go on stage and perform without any backing track. So we had to have a drummer, who was Michael Crook, who was a young symphonic percussionist who could play really great kit as well. So he was perfect for it. And not only that, he looked like a younger, better looking version of George Clooney. So there was all those considerations involved, and 2 girls on woodwinds, had a flute, oboe, 2 guitarists actually, only because I couldn't choose between the 2 of them. One was a beautiful girl and one was just a great player, so I chose them both. So rather unusually, we had two Spanish guitars, classical guitars, and bass player, a bass, contrabass, symphonic player who also could play bass guitar. So it was a self-contained unit, and everything I wrote for them, I wrote with the idea that they could play it without any kind of backing track, because in those days it was pretty important to me that the band should be self-contained. And that they went to #1 in the classical charts for 3 months solid.
Yeah, they were very popular.
Yeah. So that's the story of them. And then of course, when they broke up, again, because people would leave, you know, and if someone leaves just after you've taken the photo for the album cover, you know, or which is what happened to the violinist. We got a new violinist who stayed with us then for the duration, and the oboe player left. Beautiful girl, oboe player, great player, I mean, you know, but she was pretty too. But she left 3 days before our big Far Eastern tour of the Far East. And I had to go running around all the music colleges looking for a girl who could play the oboe. And I ended up actually walking up to pretty girls in the street saying, I don't suppose you can play the oboe, can you? Which, of course, was completely the wrong message.
You know, I believe that story 1000% as well.
Oh, yes.
Because that is just the sort of thing that you would do.
Yeah, but I wasn't trying to take the piss. I actually just thought there's 1,000 to 1 chance. You know?
There's some guy asking me if I can play the oboe. That's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. You've got guests, so listen very quickly. You've touched on this. You want to do this symphony, and I'm going to nag you to do that, especially if it's along the lines of that piece, because yes, it'll make you happy, it'll make me happy. I just think you've got some real, that for me is the real treasure of Mike Batt. That first minute of that, for me, there is a wow factor there. And I defy anybody to listen to that piece of that introduction and say that is not amazing. You have to do that. What else I know your head's buzzing and you've got so much to do. What else would you like to do?
Trust me, the classical critics, if I did that times 10 for my symphony, I would get beaten to death by the critics, because they'd all think I was writing music from 100 years ago.
I don't hear.
But I don't care, you know. No. I don't really care.
Good, so do it.
Write it, yeah.
Do it. Yeah. Honestly, I guarantee, if I know anything about music, I know that such a work would stand the test of time, and I defy anybody to listen to that. I mean, I find it extremely difficult for anyone to listen to that first minute and dissect it critically, really and truly. It's just, I think certain bits of music are universal. I understand what you're saying, and the problem is people. I can almost imagine people would say, "Wow, that's beautiful. Who's that? Mike Batt." Oh, well, what's that? Yeah. I can understand that there is that aspect of it, and that to me would be the only reason why anybody could possibly criticize that, because of who wrote it, not because of the work of it on its own merits. And that is sad. That is a shame.
Well, you know, it's a bit like I always thought it'd be fun to do a blind tasting of, let's say, take 6 different versions of the planets and just play them to 6 critics, 10 critics, and ask them to fill in a little form as to which one they thought was conducted by the Womble. And which one was conducted by...
We should do it.
Yeah.
I'll come and do the filming. I'll do it for free.
I bet they couldn't tell.
I guarantee they wouldn't. Or I guarantee that no one would pick out the Mike Batt piece and say, "Oh yeah, that's Mike Batt's one. We can tell that because that lacks this, or this is devoid of that, or it doesn't." Yeah. Unfortunately, opera and classical music is inhabited by the very people who kind of inflect that genre with all those accusations of...
Well, in a way, it's perfectly understandable, and it's in a way necessary for there to be snobbishness. I hate that I hate saying that because I'm a complete enemy of snobbishness.
Yes.
But in a way, you have to have people running classical record companies who are classical snobs because they know that they're putting out music for people who will feel similarly to them. And it's a very brave classical executive who will say, yes, I like this because it's not, because I've never heard anything like it. Or I've heard loads of things like it, but this is a very great example of it. I don't know what I'm really saying. I've lost my way in this sentence, but I'm just saying that jazz snobs, for example, if there weren't jazz snobs, there wouldn't be jazz clubs and there wouldn't be jazz. There wouldn't be genres. There should be genres. Not all music should be. Not everyone should do what I do, which is everything. People have got to specialize. I don't think I would like to be arrogant enough to say that I don't think my individual genres suffer from my not having specialized in them. I'd like to think I can do as well as a specialist in each of the different disciplines that I've chosen. But I nevertheless think that the world needs specialists and the world needs snobs, because without it, you don't have this. It's very sad for one reason. It's just a bit like the internet. That's got great qualities and great damaging factors.
Oh, yes.
But similarly, there is a reason why people say, look, I am, a great fan of this kind of music by this kind of person, and I find it very hard to step over the threshold into a different kind of music, or I look down on it, or I look up to it. It's a pity. I think one of the things I most enjoy about being alive and in doing the job I do is I don't look down on other kinds of music, and I don't really look up to any other kinds of music either. I just think of it as, it's all music. And I know that sounds like a cliche. I don't say that other cliche, which is there's good music and bad music, but who's know what the fuck bad music is? There's music you like, music you don't like. There's music that does a trick for you, or which doesn't. And a lot of that's got to do with how much time you've got to get into it and listen to it. Because, I remember hating each new Beatles song that came out, and then 2 days later thinking it was quite good, and 2 days after that thinking it was the best thing they ever did. Because sometimes repetition of listening and that's very much a thing in classical music, It
is, but then again, even people like Joseph Kalea sung just comparatively recently a Mantovani album, and he's a fan of Mancini as well, and of course Rennie Fleming has very much crossed over into
there are people. I've got to say that I'm not very impressed with most opera singers' efforts in the light music field.
Yes, I think, of course, the thing is, as you know yourself, they're producing the voice a completely different way, and I think a lot of them find it difficult to sing more with the head, because funnily enough, I was speaking to a great tenor recently, Brian Jade, American tenor, and he says something which you touched on earlier about the old mono recordings, and he said that the old mono recordings actually gave a far more accurate atmospheric rendition of how an orchestra and a singer sounds, whereas the modern digitalized recordings kind of, you don't even need to have the voice. You can have a little microphone and it amplifies it. It's nothing like how it actually is.
It's like chalk and cheese. It's a different art. And mixing them is very, very dangerous, and you've got to be very, very lucky or clever to do it. Yeah. There are some people who can do it. There's some people who can cross over, and Colm Wilkinson's one of them.
Right, yeah.
I think also probably He's the blind guy from Italy.
Andrea Bocelli.
Yeah, I mean he's got it.
He's got an exquisite voice. I mean, he started out playing piano in clubs,
Yeah,
commercial music,
yeah,
contemporary music. He has got an exquisite voice. He would struggle to fill an opera house, which most critiques would say
yeah.
is his failing.
Oh, of course, yeah. But you know, as you say, we must finish soon. But it's a bit like having Shakespearean actors in I don't know, the bill, and then talking in that way, and projecting to the back of the auditorium, when in fact they're just talking to someone that's 2 feet away. If you see them shooting a film, if they've ever been on a film set, they're just talking not as loud as I'm talking to you now. And if they did that on stage in a play, everyone would be going, "What the fuck's going on? I can't hear it."
Yeah.
So it's a whole different style and discipline. And so an opera singer has got to break down all that they've learned about projection and voice production in order to act in a different way, in the way that you would talk to your wife or your husband in the kitchen while you're peeling the potatoes. And that is, you can't do that if you're in an opera, because in an opera you peel potatoes while you're singing in a much louder voice.
Yeah.
And that's why Carreras had the reason that Carreras, I think the reason that Carreras is having a problem with what's his name,
Bernstein.
Yeah, was that Bernstein is a very hard rhythm to get hold of. That something's coming, little missing beats and everything. That's what he was having a problem with. It wasn't. Bernstein would not have chosen Carreras as a young tenor, brilliant young tenor, if he hadn't wanted that voice. So it wasn't the fact he couldn't sing that material. It was written for that kind of voice, or they wanted to make a record with that intent, that it should sound classical. Maybe on stage it sounds better with theatre voices, right? But in that particular album, they wanted classical.
I think it's also the accent, your native tongue. I mean, I love, and he's a friend of mine, I adore Joseph Calleja. He's an amazing tenor, Maltese tenor. But he recorded a tribute album to Mario Lanza. Now, for me, one of the reasons I think Lanza was so phenomenal was because he sung, although he was American-Italian, he sung in his native tongue. When you get someone with a very rich foreign accent trying to sing an English composition, you have this, what the fuck? What is he say? What was that he said? What was that word?
Yeah.
It sounds odd, and it does. Yeah. It affects the whole piece. And I think, going back to Bernstein, I think that's the problem. Part of the problem Carreras had trying to rabble in English, which is not his native tongue, and
that was part of it. But part of it was just that he was flustered because he was working with the maestro, and he couldn't get the rhythm.
Yeah,
and it was pissing Bernstein off.
Yeah,
he wasn't being patient and saying, "Look, let's calm down." And he wasn't making it easy for Carreras. I don't think. He was being a bit of a prick.
Mike, you've got guests, and I could speak to you all day. I've
really enjoyed it. So I'm sorry I've rambled on.
Listen, you have not rambled on it. You've absolutely made my day. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Funnily enough, between me and you, 18 months ago, I was asked to look into making a documentary down, because I live very close to Dungeness. I don't know whether you know where the hell it is. The most bizarre expanse of land you would ever come across. And I was approached by a production company to look at doing a documentary there. And that fell through. As an independent, it happens all the bloody time. I'm similar work to you. You spend weeks and weeks working on something, but you've got to sell the bloody thing at the end of the day, or get someone to finance it. And they, for very briefly, entertained the idea of, but they were more actually interested in doing something with Mike Batt. Now, sadly, it didn't come off, but I still hold, between me and you, I hold hopes that one day I'm going to persuade somebody, look, let's do a documentary on Mike Batt. That, you know,
well, it's never been done, so
no, it hasn't. I'm gonna push for it.
I'm afraid that the arts community have never really thought me, the South Bank lot, never really thought of me as worth pointing a camera at. But so lovely talking to you.
And you,
Thanks
my friend.
for thinking of it.
Just think we've given the side of Mike Batt today that I wanted to uncover, and I think gets so rarely shown or talked about. Well,
it's very, very nice of you to take the time, and I do appreciate you.
I love it. Pleasure.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'll say goodbye then. Okay. Well,
take care, Mike.
Have a good weekend.
God bless, my friend. And you.
Cheers. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.